So let's go. So yes, this week is Parshas Lech Lecha, and yes, it's so amazing that we're getting together. This is the first week that we're getting together since the hostages have been released, and we've been praying for them every week, week after week after week, and we finally see the results of that. More so, I think this week, Parshas Lech Lecha, we're going to see where the strength of these hostages came from, where it all came from. And when I was going through, like I really wanted to go through a lot of the midrashim as well of what happened to Avraham, because when you go through some of the stories, like a lot of it isn't in the Torah. In other words, this week's Torah portion starts with Lech Lecha me'artzecha. God tells Avraham, go out of your land, go out of your birthplace, go to the land that I will show you. Avraham was already 75 years old at this point. We don't know anything about him before then. Right. And we are told that Avraham had 10 tests. There were 10 tests that Avraham was given in his life. And according to the Medrash, this was the third test. According to Rambam, there's a different calculation, but according to the Medrash, this was the third test that he was already given. Go out from your land. So I was curious, what were the other two tests? What were the other two tests that were before then? And I wanted to really understand what was life like as Avram was forming to become the Avram that we know. And what can we learn from that about ourselves and about our situation today? And as I'm looking through the Medrash and hearing the stories, it's just so, some of it is just so, you see exactly where it came from, as you're going to see. But the question that we start off with is, if this is the third test that Avram was given, what were the other two tests? And why is the Torah starting with this third one instead of the other ones? And we're going to talk about that. But first, let's find out what are the other two tests that he was given. So the first test that Avram was given is during his birth, okay? During his birth and the first early years of his life. So we're told that he was born, they were living in Ur Kasdim at the time, and there was a big king. His name was? Nimrod, okay? And Nimrod was a very wicked king, and he was a very powerful king. And he was a king who served himself. He thought he was an idol. He thought he was a god. And what happens is, during the time of Nimrod, the astrologers, right before Avram was born, the astrologers came to Nimrod and they said, there is very similar to what happened in Mitzrayim. They said, we see in the stars, we see in the signs in astrology that this person is going to be born, and he's going to be someone who is going to rebel against you. He's someone who's going to take over from you. He's stronger than you. He's somebody who's going to be a danger to you. And when Nimrod hears that, he says, okay, we have to get rid of this person, this son, this boy. What we're going to do is have the architects build all these homes where women who are pregnant will go into the home to be taken care of. And once they are there, we are going to make sure that no baby boys come out. All the baby boys will be killed. Just like with Mitzrayim, right? Exactly the same story, because we don't want that threat to my throne. And that's what they did. Now, it says that, now Terach, Avram's father, was a big nobleman. He was in Nimrod's little court. He was among the men that Nimrod would consult with. And he jokingly kind of said to Nimrod, oh, well, you don't mean to do this to me, to my household. And Nimrod says, no, of course not to your household. And it says that Nimrod actually killed 700,000 baby boys were murdered. Huh? 700,000 baby boys were murdered. Wow. Now, the astrologers, after all these babies are murdered, the astrologers realize one morning that the threat is still there, right? The threat of Avram is still there because Avram was born. And Avram was born in his own home, in Terach's home. And they see that there's a threat above Terach's home, where all the stars, there was one star that was coming out and it was shooting against these other stars, and they realized that this means that the threat is still there, and the threat is Terach's son. So they tell this to Nimrod, and Nimrod immediately sends his messengers to Avram's home to take away his son, to sacrifice his son, to kill his son. And the messengers say to him, we're going to give you a lot of gold, just give us your child. And Avraham says, what's the point of gold if I don't have a child? Who's going to inherit the gold? It's like you come... Terach. I'm sorry, Terach. Avram's father, yes. Terach says, what's the point of having gold if I'm not going to have the son to inherit it? And he refuses, and he sends them away. Now, he realizes that they're going to come back. And in that time, while they left to go back to Nimrod and report to Nimrod what happened, he sends Avraham and his mother, her name was... Yes, Amaltai, right?
We say Amaltai in Base Yaakov, I don't know.
Okay, okay. So they send this Amaltai or Amalsai away to a cave with her son Avraham to hide him. And when the messengers of Nimrod came back, when the officers of Nimrod came back, he gives them instead his maid's son, and they take that son and they kill him.
Oh, that's terrible.
Yeah, that is terrible. But this is how Avraham was saved. So Avram was then raised for many, many years. He was hiding in the cave with his mother. His mother came to visit him, but he was far away from the wicked civilization. And it was in this cave that he was able to recognize God. It says when he was 3 years old, he looked around him and he said, who is the creator of all this? Who am I supposed to serve? And again, he looked at like all the different things. He says there can't be that there's a castle. You know, imagine you come to an empty place and there's this beautiful castle that's completely filled with all the furnishings and so carefully with such architecture designed and created. How could there be a castle without a creator, with someone who created it? Look at this world, look at this beautiful world. It doesn't make sense that there isn't someone, an architect, who created this world. And that's when he started thinking, and he was a young boy at the time, and he started thinking about who is this God? Who is this God? It just reminded me also, like we were talking just before about the hostages, and yeah, I'm sure you've read about Omer Shem Tov, how he was like, it's like unbelievable the words that he says. He says he's in the tunnel and he's thinking he's a hostage, and his closeness to God. He says the one thing that he could say he possibly misses of being in that tunnel is the closeness that he felt to God when he was there. He says, God was like right there with me. I felt his presence, and I try, he says, to find that presence now as I'm gone, and I'm having a hard time finding that presence. And that's what we see, that even in the darkest of times, we feel, that's especially when we feel the presence of God. When you squeeze a Jew, what comes out is this godliness, the connection that we have to God. And he says, what did he do in the tunnel? He would wake up every morning and he would have a conversation with God. And he would say, Abba, Father, how are you today? How are you doing today? Instead of like all the things that I need. And it was just like such a thing that like, it's like a brick hit me. Like, my prayers are all like, here's my shopping list, God, this is what I need, and I really need this, and you got to come through. And instead, like, what was he saying? He was saying like, Abba, Father, how are you today?
Is this the hostage?
Yeah, this is the hostage. But this is like Avraham. Where did he get this from? It's from this, like, you can see this, like Avraham going through this procedure in his head, like he's not brought up in that society, and he's thinking, what's strong out here? What's strong? Maybe it's the sun, but then he sees the sun disappears at night. So it can't be the sun. Maybe it's the rain, but the rain, is pushed away with the clouds. Maybe I should serve the earth, but the earth needs the sun to so like he was going through this whole procedure in his mind, and he says, it must be that there's a creator of heavens and earth, a creator who created it all. And that's how he comes to that conclusion when he was just a young boy. Now, meanwhile, you're probably wondering what happened in Nimrod's palace. So meanwhile, in Nimrod's palace, nothing is happening. So the officers just forgot about it. The astrologers forgot about the threat. They're not seeing anything. Avram's hidden in the cave for many, many years, and they're not seeing anything. So after a period of, I think it said after a period of over 10 years, Avram actually returns to his home.
So he was 10 years old when he returned?
At least, yes. Yes, he stayed there for many years, and after a period of about 10 years, he returns. And what does he return to? His father, Terach, serves idols. And not only does he serve idols, but he has a store for idols. And this is where he sells the idols. So he comes back, and he puts Avraham in charge of the store at one point in time. And he says to Avraham, when people come in, the more important and the bigger the person is, sell the bigger idols to, which you said the bigger idols are worth more money. So the more important a person looks, try to sell him the more expensive and bigger idols. And this very important person came into the store, and he's looking at this very big idol that Avram is about to sell to him, and he's ready to pay the large amount that was due for this idol. And Avram turns to him and he says, "Tell me, how old are you?" And the man says, "I'm 50 years old." And he says, "Wow, that's so interesting that a 50-year-old should serve a God who was just one day old." He says, "What?" He says, "Well, this idol was just made yesterday. So you're a 50-year-old man who's serving a one-day-old idol." And the man realized how ridiculous that was, and he left. Another woman came in, it says, and she came in because she needed an idol to protect her, because she had a fire. Robbers came into her house and stole her idols. And he says, "Wow, that's very interesting. That your God could not protect himself against idols. So how do you think your God is going to protect you?" And she said, "So what should I do?" He said, "Serve the creator of the universe, not idols, but the creator of the universe." And so Avram was not doing too well as the proprietor of the store, to say the least. At one point, his father came back to the store, and this is the famous story that we heard of. Avraham said a man came in and brought some food for the idol, as was the custom. He brought food for the idol, and the big idol was jealous of the food that was brought to that other idol, so the big idol knocked over the little idol and chopped off his head. And he had the hammer or the sword or whatever it was that the big idol was using to kill the little idol. And his father says, "What are you talking about? They can't do that. We know that idols can't move, idols can't talk, idols can't hold a hammer or hold a sword against each other." And he said, "So if that's the case, why are you serving these idols?" So Avram was really giving his father a real run for the money. Okay, he was really challenging this whole worldview of what was going on. The problem came when one day Avraham was taken with Terach to Nimrod's palace, and Avraham did the same thing. He also he also rejected these idols, and he also said that there's really no point in serving these idols, and he set them on fire. He set these idols on fire. He says, "These idols, look, no one's moving, no one's doing anything, and how is it that you're able to serve these idols?" And it was then that Nimrod took Avraham and put him in prison. And he put him in prison for many, many years. He arrested him.
How many years?
Many years.
No, he arrested Avraham.
He was brought to, Avram was brought to Nimrod, and before he was put into prison, and he said to him that he wants him to bow down to Nimrod, because Nimrod considered himself a god. And Avram said, no, he refused to bow down to him, and he said, "How could you not bow down to me? I'm a god. And Avram says to him, "If you're a god, and you created this world, so look at the sun. It rises in the east and sets in the west. Make the sun rise in the west and set in the sun. That if you truly are God." And of course, Nimrod was speechless, but no one had challenged him in that way, like that. And he was very, very angry. And then he the second thing that Avraham says, if you're also God, so tell me, what am I thinking right now? And of course, Nimrod couldn't tell him what he was thinking because he wasn't a God. So he said that you are not a God. God, the creator of the universe, is the God. And at that point, Nimrod took Avraham and threw him into the dungeon, into the prison for 10 years. This is where he was for 10 years. But it was there that his belief in God did not waver. That was the first test that Avraham had, that he was brought to Nimrod. This entire time that he found God, but that he was challenged, he never wavered in his belief. He never wavered in his faith. Even before Nimrod, he was not going to succumb to Nimrod, to say that he's a king, and for this reason he was thrown into prison for 10 years, and where he remained. That's test number 1. Test number 2, the Midrash says, is after 10 years, Nimrod had Avram brought to him. And Nimrod said, let's worship the fire. Fire is so strong. Let's worship fire. It's the strongest substance that there is. Fire destroys. It's so powerful. And Avram says, well, what about water? Water puts out fire. And so Nimrod said, okay, so let's worship the water. And he says, but what about the clouds? They're stronger than the water because they carry the water. The clouds carry the rain. So he says, okay, let's worship the clouds, fine. And Avram says, well, what about the wind? The wind disperses the clouds, so it's even stronger. So he says, okay, so let's worship the wind. And then Avram says, okay, well, what about the human being? The wind blows and the human being stands, and the wind doesn't blow the human being. So the human being is even stronger than him. And at this point, Nimrod got really aggravated. And he said, obviously, Avram is making fun of him. So he said, we're going to throw him not into a dungeon and a prison, for which he was in for 10 years, but we're going to throw him into this furnace of fire. And for 3 days, they asked all the people to donate wood so that they can put Avraham in this furnace full with the wood. And it says for 3 days, Avraham stood there, and all around him, they put piles and piles and piles of wood all around him. And after that time period, and after that, after 3 days gathering all this wood that people were donated, everyone was all excited about it. And it says the women and the children were like standing on the rooftops to watch this whole spectacle. So mean, but it like reminded me of like, again, the hostages dancing in the street and everyone watching. Like, so much of this is like, I mean, you probably have seen also with the hostages that they were asked over and over. So many of them said, like, if I would have just read a line from the Quran, I would have been given an extra half a pita, or if I would have converted, like, I would have been given, and yet they stood strong. Like, Sharabi just came out with his book on hostage, and he was...
I have it, I just got it.
I also just got it, and he was like, but he keeps saying, like, and it was interesting, and he was actually interviewed in the Ami magazine this past week, and the person who was interviewing him says to him, like, this is real Mesirat Nefesh. Mesirat Nefesh means like self-sacrifice, giving over your soul, real self-sacrifice, which in Judaism is the highest level. Like when a person's ready to, this is what Avram did, ready to sacrifice his soul, his body, in order to keep Torah and mitzvot, to keep his connection. And the response that Sharabi said was just like so fascinating. He says, I'm not religious. Like, that's not part of my lexicon. I did it because this is what I am. I wasn't like, this is what I am. I'm a Jew. So a Jew doesn't do that. Like this simplicity. And that simplicity is really the soul. It's the soul talking. It's like so obvious that we're seeing the soul just coming through so brightly and shining just so. It's like they say in Chassidus, when you cut the blood of some of the, when you cut the skin of some of these Chassidim, what came out? Not blood, but Chassidus came out, like Judaism, Torah. It was so imbued in him, whether you're religious or not religious, you call it Mesirat Nefesh, that you're doing this for this high reason. No, I'm a Jew. This is not who I am. I can't even read from that. And, so it was just like,
At the risk of his life, probably.
at the risk of his life. And the truth is, if he was a learned person like a Talmid Chacham, he could have made the calculation, this is pikuach nefesh, this is a sakana, this is a danger. And a lot of the passages from the Quran are not against Judaism. They're talking, Allah Akbar means God lives. They're talking about God lives. They're not even talking about.
They don't know what God you're talking about.
But
You
they
about
think
your
that their creator, this God, their vision of God is a very different vision than our God, but they're not thinking about an idol. They're not even thinking about God's son, like in Christianity. They're thinking about God himself. Their understanding of God is totally warped, but they're thinking of God the creator. So a lot of the passages aren't even something that you're not allowed to say. And yet he couldn't say those words because he felt, this is not who I am. This is not my connection. Halakhically, maybe you could have stretched it and say, well, you could actually say it. But his words were like, this isn't me. This isn't who I am. I'm a Jew. And I can't even say this. I'm not going to allow myself to say this because there's no separation between me and God. And anything that conveys any of that. And that's what we see when Avraham, when he was, when they were bringing all these piles of wood around him, his mother came to him and she says, Avraham, just pretend, just bow down to him, just bow down to Nimrod, just do it once, and that will be out. It'll be okay. I mean, you can imagine again, a mother's heartstring is pulling at her. And Avraham says, I don't bow down to anybody. I only bow down to the creator of this world. And he stood strong with that. And after 3 days, they set it all on fire. This furnace, they put it on fire, and it was so hot. And it says, the Midrash tells us that the wood became like fruit that he was able to eat. It miraculously turned into fruit and into branches that he was able to just eat from during his time in this furnace. And after some time that the furnace is burning, they came to him. They came to see where he was, and they figured he'd be burnt to a crisp. And he was just standing there in this furnace. They saw him from afar, and as the slaves or the officers came in to get him, the fire was so strong it was burning them. They couldn't go in. And Nimrod was like, what's taking so long to get me the remains of Avraham? And they couldn't even go in because it was so hot for them. Yet for Avraham, it was not hot at all. He survived and he thrived in there. So finally Nimrod says, get him out. They saw that he was still there, get him out. And it was only an angel that told Avraham, it's time to leave from the furnace, come out, when Avraham was able to walk out of there. And Nimrod asks him, how are you alive? How is it that you're alive? And he says, God, the creator of the world, saved me. Now, the people around him many of them thought, well, it must be that he's a magician, because Avram's brother, Haran, was a magician. It must be that Avram's a magician, and therefore he did some kind of magic trick. And so his brother, it says, was kind of standing on the sidelines waiting to see, because he knew that people would ask him, do you believe also in the God that Avram is believing in? And he might be thrown into this furnace. So he was kind of on the sidelines, not sure what he should declare as his belief, waiting to see what would happen. But when he saw that Avram came out and the people said to him, do you believe in that? And he said yes, he believes also in God, the God of Avraham. And they threw him into the furnace and he died. Because when a person doesn't really believe, God did not do the miracle for him. Now Avram does marry this Haran's daughter, whose name is Sarah. Okay, she's 10 years younger than him, but he does marry her. And this was Avram's second test, that he was thrown into this Kivshan Ha'esh, this furnace of fire, and he stood strong in his belief, and he came out of it. Now, Terach realized that there this wasn't a good place for Avraham to remain, because Nimrod probably would try one thing after another. And he saw after this miracle, he said it's time for the family to move away. And that was when Terach moved to Haran with his whole family. They all moved there. This week's Torah portion starts off with the third test of Abraham, and that is Lech lecha me'artzecha. Go out of your land, your father's home, Beis Avicha, go mimoladetcha, your birthplace. Go to the land that I will show you. This is what God is telling him, and that's the third test that we have here. Now we start off saying, why is it that we start off with this third test? Like, this should give us so much insight. The first two tests that that Avram was subjected to, why is it that we're only starting off with this third test? Yes?
Is it because this is the one that he had a directive from Hashem, and the other two he thought of on his own?
That's a good answer. Yes, that's probably one answer. Very good.
It makes more of an impact that he blindly followed God. Because he, even if we didn't know about the test, he followed God.
Right.
That's just what it was.
Right, I hear what you're saying. That's also a good answer. The answer that I saw was that because the fact that the Torah is not a history book. Torah is not a history book. It tells us history, but it's not a history book. Everything that the Torah tells us, what I just told you was history. This is the midrash that we have passed on, the oral traditions that have passed on, the stories that we have passed on, that tell us all the different outside parts of it, all the extraneous information that we don't have in the Torah. But the Torah tells us things that apply to us and that's relevant to us. Now, the Torah is telling us this part of Lech Lecha Me'artzecha because this is something that every single one of us goes through. This Lech Lecha. The other things that Avram went through, Yechidei Skula, individual people go through it, like the hostages who are tremendous tzaddikim, that they went through this. They went through that self-sacrifice. They went through that imprisonment. They went through the torture and everything that they went through in order to show and prove that they believe in God. But the average person, a lot of us don't go through that on a regular basis in our lives. But what we do go through, thank God we don't go through it. Thank God we're not tested in that way. But this Lech Lecha is something that we do go through. And what is it? Lech Lecha Me'artzecha, go out from your land, was the command from God to Avraham, but we have to understand it on actually two different levels. This Lech Lecha Me'artzecha is actually God speaking to each and every one of our souls. God is speaking to our souls that are in heaven, under the throne of glory. Our soul starts off in the spiritual world, in a beautiful spiritual world, a very elevated world, a world where we can feel godliness, where we see godliness, where it's so obvious to us. And God says to this soul, I'm going to send you away. Go out, me'artzecha. And artzecha, the word artzecha also means ratzon, will. Go away from my will. I'm going to send you to a dark, deep, dark place. And the soul has to descend and leave its beautiful, sublime place up there in the heavens, in the spiritual realms, and come down to this dark, dark world and come into a physical body. Not only it's there in the spiritual world where it's free, it's not constrained by our physical self, our limitations of our physical world, and it comes into this dark, material, physical world because God says, Lech Lecha, you're going. Go out from this beautiful place, right where you're under my ratzon, under the will of God, where you're feeling the sublimity, the beautiful gorgeousness of spirituality, where everything makes sense, where you're seeing the light of God, where it's so obvious to you. Go down into this dark world, into this physical body. Why? Because it's there that you're going to have the greatest ascent. It's only when you go into this physical body that you're actually going to have the greatest ascent, because now you're going to become, in the heavens, the spiritual bodies are not able to grow and to change. What you are is what you are. But when you come down into this physical world, you're going to affect this physical world and bring God's name to the physical world. Bring out godliness in this darkness. In the place where you can't see God, that is where you're going to shine and show that God is exactly there. Which again, is exactly what we see the hostages did. In this place of such darkness, they came out of it, and you'd think that you'd have broken people who have anger against God, who are feeling so disenfranchised, such a disconnect, and yet it was there in that darkest place that they had the strongest connection, that the greatest light really shone. And that's what God says. You're going to go into this physical world, into this physical body, into a place that feels like you're not seeing me. It feels like I'm not there. There are people who say, where is God? Who is God? What is God? Is there a God? There's such confusion, and you're going to shine your light in that confusion, and that is how you're going to have the greatest ascent. So the soul, God tells to the soul of every one of us, and that's why it starts off with this parsha. When we talk about Avraham, the first Jew, God is saying to us, this is what every single one of you is doing. You're leaving that beautiful, sublime place, and you're coming into this darkness, this confusion. And why are you doing that? Because here is where you're going to have the greatest elevation. And what are you going to do when you come into this world? You're going to go into this animalistic body, this body that feels I. What matters is I, me, my wants, my needs, my goals, right? No higher purpose and higher mission, but it's the here and the now. It's what I want right now. It's my desires. And you're going to go into this physical body, and you're going to do the same thing to the physical body of Lech Lecha. What are you going to do to the physical body? You're going to tell the physical body, Lech Lecha me'artzecha. I'm going to stop. I'm going to go away from the artzecha. And again, we said artzecha means ratzon, will. We said before it meant God's will. Now I'm going to go away from the will of my animalistic self, those wills that are mundane wills, those wills that are negative wills, those wills that are selfish wills, those wills that want me to go against morality for myself, my needs, my goals. I'm going to leave that. I'm going to stop from doing that. I'm going to go away from mimoladetecha, from my birthplace. And what is a birthplace? That's the natural. What is a birthplace? A birthplace is where you feel the natural assumptions of what's going on around you, the natural way of doing things, what everyone does. This is what everyone does, right? Everyone's into that. Have you ever heard you say, but everyone does that, right? So correct, I'm not so bad. Everyone's doing that. But this is what the soul is told to do. Go away from those natural assumptions that are divorced from the real will of God. Go away from that. And go away even mibes avicha, from all the things that are around you, the things that we compare ourselves, the habits, the surroundings that are around you. Go away from that all and go to El Haaretz Asher Arecha, to the land that God shows you. Go to the path that God shows you. So what is the soul telling? It's the soul is coming into this body and it's saying, I am going to get stronger and better because I'm going to convince myself, I'm going to convince this body that I now have to work in partnership with. We're partners now, and I'm using the body for my needs, and the body is trying to overcome me. It's like the Alter Rebbe says, it's like the city. The body is like the city where two people are fighting, and who's going to win? The soul that has this transcendental ideas of beautiful beauty and mission and spirituality, or the body which is talking about the physical wants and needs that I must have right now. The two are fighting and in conflict, and who's going to win? And so the soul comes down into this world, but it needs to use the body. It needs to partner with the body. It's not that it just forgets the body. It uses the body. We use the body for mitzvot. We use the body to eat, to say mitzvah. We use the body to go and run and do a favor to somebody. We need the physical body, the hands and the legs and our mouths to pray. We need to use the body. So the soul is coming into the physical body and using the vehicle of the body to teach the body to transcend, to go away from its natural desires, from its natural materialistic, mundane desires, from its natural assumptions of what everyone else is doing, and its natural way of thinking, to elevate itself, to become higher, to bring itself out of this, the gravity and the pull of the negativity of the body, and to really become who it's supposed to become. And in that way, we change the darkness of this world into the most beautiful light, even a light that we couldn't reach when we were up there in the most sublime spiritual heavens. We couldn't reach it, but we reach it here, down here in this physical world. So that is really the message of the Parsha. Now I want to just say one more thing about this Parsha, and that is at the end of the Parsha, or later on in the Parsha, we have the birth of Yitzchak, right? Which is a beautiful, we're not going to go into all the details because I want to say this quickly, but we have the birth of Yitzchak. We also have Yishmael, the birth of Yishmael earlier in the Parsha. And God promises Avraham that he will have Yitzchak. And when God says to Avraham, you will have Yitzchak, Avraham makes a very bad mistake. And the Zohar says it was this mistake that is causing us the suffering that we're suffering right now in this world today.
Oh, really?
And that is, he says to Hashem, just a few words, Lu Yishmael Yichyeh Lefanecha, 4 words. If only Yishmael would live before you. In other words, God is promising Avraham, I'm giving you a new child. Ki beYitzchak yikareh lecha zera. It's only with Yitzchak that you will. Yitzchak is your real prodigy. Yitzchak is your real son. He's your real child. It's only through Yitzchak that you will have the continuation of your goals and your mission. And Avraham says, Lu Yishmael Yichyeh Lefanecha. If only Yishmael will live in front of you, will live before you. What was Avraham trying to say? Avraham was trying to say, you're promising me a miracle, but I already have a son. Let this son be. Instead of creating this whole big miracle, let Yishmael be this great son. Let Yishmael be someone who you could be proud of. Let Yishmael be a person of greatness. And why was Avraham saying this? Because the wife that he took, Hagar, who Sarah encouraged him to take, you remember, who was she? She was the daughter of Paro. She was the princess, and she left her sublime life, her beautiful, luxurious life in Paro's palace in order to become a maidservant of Avraham. So she wasn't just like a lowlife. She was really a spiritual individual. In fact, when he later remarries her, she's called Keturah, right? Later on, after Sarah passes away, much, much later, she's called Keturah, which is the spices that we have in the Beit HaMikdash, the beautiful spices, which shows that she had a lot of very beautiful qualities about her. So Avram was saying, this child should hopefully become a great person. And Hashem says, no, you're mistaken. This Yishmael is not going to be the chosen people. Yishmael is not going to be Am HaNivchar. It's Yitzchak who will be. It's only through Yitzchak. And what is the difference between Yishmael and Yitzchak? I mean, obviously there was a lot of differences, but there was 2 main things that we see of how they were intrinsically very different. One is their birth. Yishmael was born naturally. Yitzchak was born supernaturally. Sarah was already 90 years old. It was a miracle. She wasn't supposed to have children. She couldn't have children. According to some, she didn't even have a womb. And here she has a child, this miraculous child of Yitzchak. So their birth was miraculous. Yitzchak's birth was miraculous versus natural. And the second thing is, in this week's Torah portion, they have a Brit Milah. How old was Yishmael when he had the Brit Milah? 13. How old was Yitzchak when he had his Brit Milah?
8 days.
8 days old. And what is this teaching us? This, obviously the difference between Yitzchak and Yishmael is like, there's no comparison, it's day and night. But these 2 important parts are telling us something integral about what a Jew is. A Jew is someone who is a miracle. Every single one of us is a miracle. A Jew is going to go through a life and a history, and we see this. We see this, unfortunately, in our times. And we've seen this over and over and over again throughout history. A Jew's existence is not based on nature. It's not based on what's natural. A Jew's existence and survival is completely miraculous. The second thing that we see is that Yitzchak had his bris milah when he was 8 days old. He didn't choose it. An infant doesn't choose. Yishmael chose. He was 13. He could have said yes. He could have said no. He chose to do it. A Jew isn't, Yitzchak wasn't choosing what he did. It was a part of him. And that's what we said before about Omer. It was like, not Omer, about Sharabi, like how he said, like, I couldn't even, like it wasn't something I could do. I couldn't read from the Quran. This is not who I am. This is not who I am. This is not my being. The nature of a Jew is very different. We are naturally Jewish. This is who we are. We're born Jewish. He was 8 days old and he was circumcised. It wasn't a choice that he was making. This was who he is. This was part of him. And this is something that, again, we have to remember as the Jewish people. We're a miraculous nation, and we're a nation that is not existing through the laws of nature, but we're beyond nature. And our connection to God, our connection to Judaism, is not even something that we chose. Of course we chose it. Of course we said Nasa v'nishma. But this is far deeper than our choice. This is who we are. This is intrinsic to who we are. This is our being. And when we realize that, we can really understand what is a Jew. A Jew is intrinsically connected to God, to Torah. We're one. It's as God, Torah, and the Jewish people are one triangle. We're one triangle where we're all this connected by this thick, unbreakable connection. And it's not something that we choose, not something that we can unchoose, because this is who we are. And that is really the message of Parshas Lech Lecha, which I think we have seen, in the last month or so, in the last few weeks, we've seen it in real time, in real reality, how this expresses itself in front of our eyes by real people who, whether they're religious or not religious, really didn't make a difference. Look at it. And someone said to me, okay, but maybe not all the hostages saw God in the tunnels. Maybe not all of them came out feeling that way. But the fact that one of them could even come out that way, that shows. And it's much more than one. I mean, so many of them. But even if one could come out that way, that itself is proof of what the Jewish soul is, what the Jewish soul's connection to God is. And we've seen it not with one, but with so many of them. And as you said, like the atmosphere in Israel is now this longing for God, this longing to understand who we are. What are we? Oh, keeping Shabbos? Like, let's understand that. Because if this is what the hostages were doing in the tunnels, if this is the connection they felt, that they're singing in the tunnels, singing these songs like, that as they were saying, or making kiddush on water.
Yeah, taking from the bagel a piece of
Salt. Like unbelievable. Or the other one who was saying I was like wrapping tefillin. I didn't have tefillin, but I'm like wrapping tefillin as if I have the tefillin. If this is what we're doing when we're in the tunnels of Gaza, when we're not even, some of them were not even religious. Many of them were not even religious. They weren't brought up with this. This is what you're finding in the darkest places of the world. This is uncovering exactly what we're saying of what is a Jew. Not a choice even. It wasn't 13 that he chose it. He's 8 days old. He doesn't even understand it because it's beyond reason. Of course there's reason there, but it's more than reason. It's beyond reason. It's a connection that is an unbreakable connection that is beyond understanding, beyond reason, beyond anything that you can define. It's undefinable. And that is why, by the way, the nations of the world are so jealous of us. That is why there is so much anti-Semitism, because of this reality of who we are, of who the Jewish people are. So we start off with that Lech Lecha, and we go into the Bris Milah, because this is who we are. We are Lech Lecha. We are the Jewish people. We are given the command by God to come into this world, to come from that dark place, but to come into this world and to shine our light in this world. And it's through our coming into this world that we create the greatest revelation of light. Even greater than had we not been born, even greater than if we were just in the spiritual realms. We create the greatest revelation of light and godliness in this world as a Jewish people. May we all shine our individual light to contribute to this vast, beautiful, overwhelming light until the actual overwhelmingness happens and we can envision Mashiach really right now in our times.
Thank you.